Giovanni Battista Jacopo, better known by his nickname Rosso Fiorentino after his red hair and place of origin, is a 16th-century early Italian Mannerist artist. Rosso claimed his place in history with his original style and innovative approach to ecclesiastical subject matter. Rosso traveled to several places throughout Italy starting in 1518, eventually making his way to the French court in 1530. This peripatetic lifestyle was relatively unique compared to his contemporaries and allowed him to engage with various patrons and artists with distinct lifestyle, which translated over into his commissions. Looking at Rosso Fiorentino's oeuvre, it is obvious that he changed his style multiple times over the course of his career. In my research, I argued that Rosso's stylistic changes were prompted by his professional relationships through family and other artists as well as his professional connections rather than contemporary stylistic trends or solely requests from patrons. This presentation will analyze the years from 1518 through his time in Rome, where the changes in his style were most pronounced. During this period, Rosso traveled every couple of years or so, moving from his hometown of Florence in 1518 to Piombino, then Volterra, back to Florence, and finally settling briefly in Rome in 1524 before departing for the court of Francis I 6 years later. Rosso's fluidity in style can be traced back to his training, the various choices of workshop, and artistic experiences. The possible connections made by Rosso's brother Fra Filippo and Rosso's previous experience gave him the commission to paint the Assumption of the Virgin in 1517 at Santissima Annunziata. Rosso divided the roughly square composition into two horizontal zones, showing the split between heaven and earth, containing the Virgin in the top half and the saints in the bottom half. The lower section of the composition shows Rosso's lack of maturity in his craft and also his inventive approach. The lower half is manipulated, allowing a shallower space compared to the top half of the composition containing the Virgin. The scene is pared down with overlapping figures and drapery, which does not allow space for the tomb, which is common in the Assumption of the Virgin scene. There is a sharpness in the folds of the massive drapery, while the drapery of the saint in green inadvertently spills from the picture frame. Each apostle has caricatured facial expressions as they individually react to the scene. In Rosso's travels after Florence, the connections made at the court of Jacopo v. Appiani in Piombino led Rosso to Naples, where the influence of abstraction aided Rosso's distinct style change seen in the Deposition on the Cross in 1521 produced in Volterra. Today, the Deposition from the Cross is Rosso's most discussed single image, although this piece did not gain much recognition during the 16th century due to its location. The rectangular composition curved at the top consists of two ladders with a cross in the center. Rosso utilizes body composition to enhance the emotion of the scene rather than the previous caricature seen in the Assumption. Similar to the Assumption, the drapery has fairly rigid angles, especially seen in Mary Magdalene, the middle figure in reddish-orange fabric at the bottom of the composition. Rosso's color palette is still fairly limited, containing red, orange, blues, and greens. Compared to the Assumption of the Virgin, the color is more acidic. From Volterra, Rosso headed back to Florence, where his style changed abruptly. The time spent with Carlo Giannuri led Rosso to come in contact with Italian sculptor and painter Baccio Bandinelli, who influenced Rosso's style change seen in the Betrothal of the Virgin at San Lorenzo in 1523. In comparison to the Deposition from the Cross, the figures are posed more naturally and are not as abstracted. They are also less expressive than previously seen in Volterra. The drapery is not as angular and rigid, but rather elegant and subtle. Similar to the Deposition, Rosso utilized a fairly limited color palette, keeping to primary and secondary colors that are placed on different parts of the figure's drapery. The color of the composition is not as vibrant and acidic as the Deposition from the Cross, but more subdued. After Florence, Rosso heads to Rome. Rosso's own interest in Michelangelo, rekindled by Baccio Bandinelli and his contemporaries in Rome, inspires yet another stylistic change present in the Dead Cross, completed between 1524 through 1527. The fairly small and spiritually flat rectangular composition is dominated by Christ's expansive body in the foreground, which is supported by 4 angles in the background. Compared to Rosso's previous works, the Dead Christ has little to no emotion, with an almost neutral expression, and is darker in tonality, but still keeping a limited color palette. These stylistic changes throughout Rosso's early career and his R-rated original style made Rosso Fiorentino one of the most intriguing Mannerist artists of the 16th century.